Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us today because we're jumping right into something you've probably done 1,000 times without a second thought. Think about the very last time you met someone new. Maybe it was a super high-stakes job interview, or a really nervous first date, or just, a standard Tuesday morning business meeting. What did you do? I'm guessing you extended your right hand, gripped theirs pretty firmly, and gave it a couple of quick pumps. It's just so automatic, right? It's literally hardwired into our daily lives. But today, we're going to hit pause and completely deconstruct this incredibly mundane everyday gesture. Because honestly, the history behind it is absolutely wild, spanning thousands and thousands of years. Let's get into it. Now, when you really stop and think about it, it brings up a super interesting question. Why this specific motion? Why not a polite bow, a little wave, or just a quick nod of the head? Why do we insist on literally grasping a total stranger's right hand and moving it up and down? I mean, step back for a second. It's actually a really weird physical interaction to have with somebody you just met. Well, as it turns out, the original reason for doing this had absolutely zero to do with being polite. Zero. It had literally everything to do with just staying alive. So, to figure this out, we've got to travel all the way back to 5th century BCE Greece. Picture this. The ancient world was a highly unpredictable, incredibly violent place. Just crossing paths with a stranger on the road was a massive, immediate threat to your life. The Greeks had this concept. They called it dexiosis. And that word comes from dexios, which just means right hand. By reaching out your right hand with a totally open palm, you were making this huge, literal statement. You were saying, hey, look, I am not hiding a sword. It was physical proof of an empty weapon hand. In a world where trust was practically non-existent, this was the ultimate symbol of goodwill. You were quite literally proving, right there on the spot, that you came in peace. And that empty-handed proof? That is exactly why we insist on using the right hand. The contrast back then was super stark. Historically, in most cultures, the right hand was the golden child. It meant strength, honor, cleanliness. Plus, since the vast majority of people are right-handed, it was the primary weapon hand. The left hand, well, that was heavily reserved for, let's just say, significantly less dignified tasks, like going to the bathroom. So offering the clean, honorable right hand was a major sign of social respect. But wait, what about the shake itself? Historians actually believe that vigorous up and down pumping motion was a clever way to shake loose any daggers a deceitful stranger might have tucked up their sleeve. So yeah, a solid handshake was basically an ancient improvised security pat-down. Now fast forward a bit, and the Romans take this Greek peace gesture and totally elevate it. They called it dextrarum iunctio, basically meaning the joining of right hands. But for the Romans, this wasn't just, hey, cool, we're not stabbing each other today. No, they turned it into a legally binding act. A handshake suddenly meant you were formalizing agreements, you were sealing major contracts, and locking in massive political alliances. It was such a big deal that the Romans literally stamped pictures of handshakes right onto their coins. They carved it into monuments and legal documents. It completely shifted from this basic survival tactic into an ironclad seal of trust. And man, seeing how this gesture evolved across the centuries is just fascinating. So we start with Greece and Rome doing the whole peace and contracts thing. Then we jump to 12th century medieval Europe. Now you've got knights and nobles using handshakes to seal sacred oaths of loyalty. It becomes totally embedded in the code of chivalry. But the real game changer? That happens in the 17th century with the Quakers. See, the Quakers completely rejected the idea of bowing or taking off their hats to so-called superiors because they deeply believed everyone was spiritually equal. Instead, they greeted literally everyone, didn't matter if you were rich or poor, with a simple handshake. They essentially democratized the whole greeting. And by the time we hit the 19th century Victorian era, they took this democratic gesture and baked it into this incredibly complex, standardized everyday etiquette. I mean, they even had literal rulebooks on exactly who was supposed to extend their hand first. Now, you might be wondering, how did this very Western tradition take over the globe? Well, as European colonialism and global commercial trade started exploding, the handshake essentially got exported across borders. But it didn't just wipe out local customs, it clashed with them. And often, it coexisted. Take Asia, for example, especially Japan. The bow has always been the traditional norm. Today, a Japanese business professional might give you a handshake to show they're open to global commerce, but they'll still maintain their cultural identity with a bow. In the Middle East, you've got these wonderful traditional embraces and really elaborate verbal greetings. And over in many African countries, the handshake evolved into something really beautiful, expanding into these complex multi-grip greetings, snaps, and shoulder bumps. Basically, the handshake adapted to fit the rest of the world. Okay, let's talk mechanics for a second. Since everyone everywhere does it, what actually makes a good handshake? Researchers have actually studied this and dissected the anatomy of the perfect shake. First up, you need a firm grip. Not a bone-crushing death grip, obviously, but confident and solid. Second, eye contact. This is crucial. It shows you're actually sincere and engaged. Third, keep it brief. 2 to 3 pumps is the absolute sweet spot. And finally, dry hands. Look, we all know the feeling of a sweaty palm. It instantly makes things uncomfortable. And this really matters because research proves that people are absolutely judging your competence, your trustworthiness, and your confidence in literally seconds, all based on these 4 simple steps. Honestly, a weak, limp handshake can instantly breed distrust, whether that's fair or not. But here is where it gets truly mind-blowing. Let's talk about the biology happening inside your brain during those 2 or 3 pumps. Because this isn't just social etiquette, guys, this is hard science. Physical touch, even something as incredibly brief as a 2-second handshake, instantly triggers a rush of oxytocin in your brain. Oxytocin is this powerful hormone that's deeply tied to bonding, trust, and human connection. So this little chemical drop perfectly explains why a handshake feels so profoundly significant, even if you're just meeting a total stranger for the very first time. Your brain is quite literally being chemically rewired on the spot to build immediate trust with the person whose hand you're holding. How cool is that? But then, an existential threat comes out of nowhere. We all remember 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic hits, and suddenly global health guidelines forced us to completely rethink all physical contact. For the first time in centuries, the handshake became entirely taboo. I mean, we watched it disappear almost overnight. Out of sheer necessity, we replaced it with elbow bumps, those awkward little foot taps, or just distant waving from across the room. It was wild. For a brief moment there, sociologists and cultural commentators were genuinely debating whether the handshake was just gone forever. And yet, as the restrictions slowly started easing up, what happened? The handshake came right back. But why? Why did it survive when it would have been so easy to just stick with a polite wave? Well, because it's just too deeply ingrained in human culture to ever truly abandon. It represents this fundamental, core human need for physical trust and acknowledgement. Even now, in our super digital age full of emojis and text messages and endless virtual meetings, that craving for face-to-face, physical acknowledgement is still there. Plus, the gesture is incredibly adaptable. If someone isn't quite comfortable with a full-on grip, it easily morphs into modern variations, like the classic fist bump. The exact form might shift a little bit, but the fundamental act of making that physical connection, that's not going anywhere. Which brings us right to our final takeaway. The very next time you reach out your hand to greet someone, I really want you to remember that you aren't just performing some polite modern courtesy. You are actively participating in a 1,000-year-old ritual of human survival and connection. You're echoing the exact same powerful message that a Greek diplomat or a Roman senator was sending centuries ago. I come in peace. I see you. Let's connect. It's a pretty incredible realization when you stop to think about it, right? So as we keep moving further and further into a digital, contactless future, will this ancient weapon check be the one physical ritual that permanently anchors us to our shared humanity? Really think about that the next time you offer your open palm to a stranger. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions and keep learning.